Hello and welcome to Virtual Coffee Brownbag Edition. Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels, and to create meaningful opportunities that allow room for um, opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. To find out more about Virtual Coffee, you can find us on virtualcoffee.io. We are very excited to have Andy here with us today, and everybody else. So thank you so much for being here today. Andy's going to be giving us a talk called Tell Your Story, a Guide to Public Speaking and Presentations. Sorry, cut off. A little bit about Andy. Andy is a father of 3 and a husband of 1. He lives in Denver and is an engineering manager at Handshake. An early career and talent platform. You can find it at joinhandshake.com. And he's given a lot of boring presentations and set upon a quest in the early 2010s to find a better way of speaking. You can find him on the internet at nomatter.press and at Virtual Andy on the socials. And today he is going to be giving us a not boring talk. So we are very, very happy. It's all you now, Andy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Becca. Thanks everybody for hanging out this morning. Apologies for the mix-up a couple of weeks ago. Glad to be back and chatting with you all. Yeah, I'm Andy. I'm in Denver. Basement here is always cool. That's why I wear silly hats. And we'll get going. If you do have questions, feel free to just raise your hand virtually in Zoom, I guess, or chat or whatever you want to do. We're going to watch a couple of videos. I'm going to force you to group watch it with us because they're short. So it's only going to be like about 5 minutes at a time. And then, of course, you're welcome to go rewatch the whole thing or watch more later. But I think they go well with the story. So let's get going. Apologies, we'll be doing some bouncing back and forth of screen sharing stuff. So let's see how that goes. Get Zoom going. All right, let's see. Are you all seeing the slide deck or my notes?
I can see telling your story, and it's a typewriter.
Perfect. All right, cool. Yeah, so that's the title of this talk, is all about telling your story. We'll talk about why that's important as we go. But it applies to presentations, even just conversations, as we'll see that your story is important. Okay, long time ago, knowledge was passed from person to person. And sharing info is obviously still important and powerful when done just verbally, right? Like written communication, especially in these async remote days, obviously critical. But how often do you need to just sit down and talk to someone, explain what you're thinking in real time? I was thinking about it last night. TikTok, I think, is a good example of the power of story, right? These short little moments that can be, what, 5, 10, 15 seconds long, and yet there's a message conveyed in that. Maya Angelou has this excellent quote. I'll give you a second to read it. Pretty strong words there, right? No greater agony than an untold story inside of you. I like to think of, a little kid when they walk up and they're like, mom, dad, or uncle, friend, whatever they're, coach, like I gotta tell you this thing, right? That's a great agony of an untold story in motion. So how do we tell our story, especially in professional settings? Well, very often we cause great agony in different ways. We put some slides together and some animations because this is really important information. I got to get this graph in front of you, and look, it's 8% in the yellow, but you can't read while I am talking to you, or rather you will read while I'm talking to you and you will not listen. So sometimes the tools that we use can be an obstacle for our message. It can confuse the audience and maybe cause more problems than what you intended to. But your story matters, big or small, it matters. You contain multitudes, as the saying goes. So let's check out how to make stories, how to share stories, how to tell stories. All right, give me a second. We're gonna bounce screens here. Let me reshare, make sure I got it right. I think I do. Cool. This is a story on storytelling from Pixar. So let me know if you can't hear or see anything.
Hey, Pete.
Oh, hey, Val.
How's it going?
You know what? I'm having a really bad day.
What happened?
See, what Val's saying when she says, what happened is, tell me a story. And that's actually what this season of Pixar in a Box is all about. To make a movie here at Pixar takes years, but it all starts with a story. Humans have been telling stories since we could speak, probably even before. We tell stories around the campfire. We write plays, we write novels, short stories, we make movies, we take photographs, tweet to each other, the list goes on. The power of story is that it has an ability to connect with people on an emotional level. One of the things you hear all the time, this advice, is write what you know. Now, as a kid, I was like, I don't want to write about suburban Minnesota, that's boring. I want to write about explosions and monsters and car chases. Well, what that actually means is, yeah, go ahead and write about monsters and explosions and car chases, but put something into it that talks about your own life, how you feel. Do you feel scared? Do you feel alone? Something from your own life will make that story come alive and not just be a boring car chase. When I started directing Monsters Incorporated, the way I would pitch it is, it's about a monster who scares kids for a living. That's his job. He clocks in, he clocks out, he eats donuts and talks about union dues, and we thought that was a pretty funny idea. And sure enough, when I would tell it to people, they would smile. But when we told the story as a film, people started getting bored and restless, and they're like, I don't understand what this movie is about. Well, what I finally figured out was that it's actually not about a monster who scares kids. It's about a man becoming a father. And that was what was happening to me. So why write about what you know? Well, it's because probably what happened to you made you feel some particular way. And what you're trying to do really when you tell a story is to get the audience to have that same feeling. One of the big revelations for me telling stories is how much work they are, really. I always thought you'd just tell the story once and it would be perfect, and geniuses like Walt Disney or Miyazaki, this brilliance comes out of their head once and there it is. Well, the truth is, our stories don't always come out exactly perfectly the first time, or the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, up to the 30th time. And so you keep going again and again and again, and only after retelling the story many, many times does it really sparkle. This season of Pixar in a Box is about how we at Pixar tell our stories, in hopes that it will inspire you to tell yours.
But seriously, what happened?
Oh, so the first thing, I get to my desk, right?
All right. I love that little introduction on storytelling, and especially that idea of, stories have to be refined. They don't come out perfect the first time. Let's hop back to slides for just a second. And I'm not even going to go full screen because we're going to switch and watch another movie. So Nancy Duarte, she wrote a book called Slideology. I think that's also the name of her website too, or maybe there's a website she still uses with that. But she talks a lot about like professional presentations and how to deliver messages using slides and storytelling in general. She's awesome. So we're going to watch a video from her, from TED, that talks about the structure of a story. So here we go, and I'll try and full screen this one again. We'll see if that works. Okay. All right, here we go. This one's about 5 minutes as well. Oh,
this
thanks,
beachfront
YouTube.
is about to become part of an unforgettable.
I had it all queued up. All right, here we go. Let's try again.
Into the open for people to see. And the way that ideas are conveyed the most effectively is through story. For thousands of years, illiterate generations would pass on their values and their culture from generation to generation, and they would stay intact. So there's something kind of magical about a story structure that makes it so that when it's assembled, it can be ingested and then recalled by the person who's receiving it. So basically, a story, you get a physical reaction. your heart can race, your eyes can dilate. You could talk about, oh, yeah, I got a chill down my spine, or I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. We actually physically react when someone's telling us a story. So even though the stage is the same, a story can be told, but once a presentation's told, it completely flatlines. And I wanted to figure out why. Why is it that we physically sit with rapt attention during a story, but it just dies for a presentation? So I wanted to figure out, how do you incorporate story into presentations? So we've had thousands of presentations back at the shop, hundreds of thousands of presentations actually. So I knew the context of a really bad presentation. And I decided to study cinema and literature and really dig in and figure out what was going on and why it was broken. So I want to show you some of the findings that led up to what I think I've uncovered as a presentation form. So it was obvious to start with Aristotle. He had a 3-act structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We studied poetics and rhetoric. And a lot of presentations don't even have that in its most simple form. And then when I moved on to studying hero archetypes, I thought, oh, okay, the presenter's the hero. They're up on stage. They're the star of the show. And it's really easy to feel that way as the presenter, that you're the star of the show. Well, I realized right away that that's really broken, because I have an idea. I can put it out there. But if you guys don't grab that idea and hold it as dear, that idea goes nowhere and the world has never changed. So in reality, the presenter isn't the hero, the audience is the hero of our idea. So if you look at Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, just at the front part, there was some really interesting insights there. So there's this likable hero in an ordinary world, and they get this call to adventure. So the world is kind of brought out of balance. And at first they're resistant. They're like, I don't know if I want to jump into this. And then a mentor comes along and helps them move from their ordinary world into a special world. And that's the role of the presenter, is to be the mentor. You're not Luke Skywalker, you're Yoda. You're the one that actually helps the audience move from one thing and into your new special idea. And that's the power of story. So in its most simple structure, it's a 3-part structure of a story. You have a likable hero who has a desire, and they encounter a roadblock, and ultimately they emerge transformed. And that's the basic structure. But it wasn't until I came across Gustav Freytag's pyramid. He drew this shape in 1863. Now, he was a German dramatist. If I click, he's a German dramatist, and he believed there was a 5-act structure, which has a exposition, a rising action, a climax, a falling action, and a denouement, which is the unraveling or the resolution of the story. Well, I love this shape. So we talk about shape. Story has an arc. Well, an arc is a shape. We talk about classical music having a shapeliness to it. So I thought, hey, if presentations had a shape, what would that shape be? And how do the greatest communicators use that shape, or do they use a shape? So I'll never forget, it was a Saturday morning. After all this study, it was a couple years of study, I drew a shape. And I was like, oh my gosh, if this shape is real, I should be able to take 2 completely different presentations and overlay it, and it should be true. So I took the obvious. I took Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and I took Steve Jobs' 2007 iPhone launch speech. I overlaid it over it, and it worked. I sat in my office just astounded. I actually cried a little because it was like, I've been given this gift, and here it is. This is the shape of a great presentation. Isn't it amazing? It's crying. So I want to walk you through it because it's actually pretty astounding. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I want to walk you through it because the greatest communicators of all time, I went through speeches, everything, actually I can overlay the shape. Even the Gettysburg Address follows the shape. So at the beginning of any presentation, you need to establish what is. You know, here's the status quo, here's what's going on. And then you need to compare that to what could be. Now you need to make that gap as big as possible because there's the commonplace of the status quo, and you need to contrast that with the loftiness of your idea. So it's like, you know, here's the past, here's the present, but look at our future. Here's a problem, but look at that problem removed. Here's a roadblock. Let's annihilate the roadblocks. You need to really amplify that gap. This would be like the inciting incident in a movie. It's when suddenly the audience has to contend with what you just put out there, and they have to say, wow, do I want to agree with this and align with it or not? And then the rest of your presentation should support that. So the middle goes back and forth. It traverses between what is and what could be, what is and what could be. Because what you're trying to do is make the status quo and the normal unappealing. And you're wanting to draw them towards what could be in the future with your idea adopted. Now, on your way to
Andy, you're muted right now.
I forgot I did that, so you didn't hear me sipping coffee. Thank you. That's Nancy. Well worth the talk, to watch her whole talk, and really anything by her. She's super awesome. And what sticks out to me on that one is that there's kind of a pattern, I think, that you saw in there, right? It's a format that great storytellers use that you can adopt and use as well. So that's maybe tip number one is steal formats, steal styles that you like, incorporate it into your own storytelling, into your own presentations, because there is kind of a pattern there, and that juxtapositioning of what is and what could be, I think, is a really powerful idea. The other thing you can do, stop screen sharing, stop sliding. I'll do it myself here. Right? We don't have to use slides. We don't have to use a presentation. I'm jealous of all the live streamers that can show code and kind of work as they go, but that's part of it too. As you heard Nancy say, the audience is the hero in your journey. So focus on the audience, think about what you can do for them. And sometimes that may not be a slide deck, it may not be live code, it may just be talking. That's a perfectly acceptable way to do things. But I'll go back against what I just said and resume screen sharing here. 1 second. The next tip is be consistent. So if you are going to use slides, if you are going to use some kind of presentation format, try to keep it consistent. Use the same font over and over, or maybe only 1 or 2 fonts. Use the same style. You can see this background image I'm using here, I've used a couple times. I just kind of shaded it lighter or darker. So consistency is important. Keeps the focus on the story, on the message, and is not like a visual distraction. You can also use little tricks like this one. Put an image in your slides as a way to sort of help the audience remember what you were talking about at that point in time without trying to make them read a bunch of text or read a bunch of bullet points. And so feel free to kind of hack the slides or hack the messaging format. But maybe don't use the arrows that are pretty popular, like to highlight things, but you can use images like this to draw people's attention to different things. A good tip I've heard is your slides are for you, not for the audience. So if the audience is the hero of your story, the slides are for you to help tell your story and not necessarily for the audience to consume. And you can always attach like a read ahead or a post read a document that goes along with your slide deck if it doesn't make a lot of sense without you there to present it. This is a helpful trick. So if you're going to present to an audience, especially either back in the day when you could present in public or in the future when we will meet again, you have a projector, it's at the front of maybe a large auditorium or a large movie theater. And it can be really hard if you're sitting in the back to read some of the tiny font that's on there. So a good rule is to find the oldest person in the audience, estimate their age, and divide that by 2. And that should be your minimum font size. So this font at the bottom is, I think, 50 point. So I don't think we have any 100-year-old folks today, but if we did, hopefully they could still read this just as well as anyone else. Obviously, for accessibility, like larger font is great too. So that's a fun tip. And it will also force you not to put much text on your slides. You cannot fit a lot of text if you have 50, 60 point font everywhere. All right. Practice makes perfect. Just like anything else, whether you're writing code or learning an instrument, doing it over and over again. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's going to be difficult, but it's super important. So this talk, I think I've given probably 5 or 6 times. It's only my 2nd time, I think, virtually. So you're seeing the poor practice there was some oddness with screen sharing, and I didn't have the YouTube videos queued up. But practicing will make your presentation, make your story better. We heard that in the Pixar thing, that stories don't come out perfect. They may need refinement. Your presentation needs refinement too. I hate doing it, but you can record yourself like solo, tell your story, give your presentation and watch it again. I subject my poor spouse to it. So I say, hey, come here, will you watch me for 10 or 15 minutes? And she'll give me feedback. And lately now my kids are the target of that sometimes too. So if you can find a friend and have them listen to your story and give you feedback. Another good rule is that plan for about 1 hour of practice time and story writing time, slide building time for every minute of your presentation. So even say a 10-20 minute presentation, if you really want to polish it, if you want to be on a TED talk screen, plan to maybe spend 10-20 hours just getting that set up, including some practice. So, depends on the format. If you're just talking with coworkers, maybe don't spend 10 hours for a 10-minute presentation, but you will need to put some time and thought into it and practice it. Speaking of time, you don't have to have a long presentation. We're going to watch another video here in a second that's about 5 minutes long. That's in the Ignite format. So Ignite, Pechakucha, lightning talks were all based on this idea that you can deliver an interesting message in just 5 or 10 minutes. So we're going to see an example of the Ignite format. Ignite format was kind of strict. I think it was 20 slides and you had 15 seconds every slide. So they'll talk about that. But the whole point of it is you can talk about a lot of things in only a few minutes. And everyone loves when a talk ends early, right? If you remember back to class, everyone appreciates getting out of class 5 or 10 minutes early. If you've been at a big conference, everyone appreciates when it's like, cool, we're done 10 minutes early. Go get a break, grab a cookie, get a coffee, chat with a friend. So no one will complain if you ever end a presentation, 5-10 minutes before the actual time. And one thing of interest is I've learned in the last few years that this applies to just conversations with colleagues as well. So you can have a tough conversation or a coaching moment in just a few minutes as well, saying, hey, Kirk, I saw you did this thing on my PR the other day. Could you help me understand that? And you might be able to hash it out with them in just a couple of minutes. It may not require like a long conversation. So apply that same idea to your stories as well. All right, here we go. We're going to watch an Ignite talk from Scott Berkun. Scott has a book called Confessions of a Public Speaker that if you're interested in speaking, I think is well worth your time. It's just a lot of fun anecdotes in there. And it's a pretty short read. All right, so let's see if we get this right. This one's about 5 minutes as well, and then happy to chat more, get questions, but we'll be done with the presentation.
Around the world.
I think storytelling is everything. It is everything. It's the most important thing that we do. It's the most important thing that we are. And if you go about thinking about life from the perspective of storytelling is everything, then doing things like public speaking or writing or talking or starting a relationship all become a lot simpler. Storytelling happens to be a universal thing. It's a timeless thing. It's something we have done as long as we have been a species. As long as we have been cultures and tribes and governments, we have been storytellers. And in fact, we align ourselves, the people we bond with, we have shared stories that often we tell again and again with each other. So storytelling is something we all do all the time, and we're all good at it. Any community you're in, any club you join, any team you root for, there's a set of stories that you all share. So when it comes to doing an Ignite talk, you guys already have stories, and you're already good at telling them because that's why you're alive. Now, when it comes to doing a talk like this, doing this format, you have to be a little bit more concise in the kinds of stories that you tell. There's 3 piles of stories to think about. The first is what you love, what gets you excited. Now, I know for a fact that all of you did not commit suicide today. You're here. Why? What is it that gets you up in the morning? What gets you going? On the other end of the spectrum, there's what you hate, what makes you angry. What would you remove from the world if you could? Also a place for passion. You can be passionate about what you hate. Because in fact, if you think enough about what you hate and you flip it over, you probably have something you should be loving more. So the trick involves what you love and what you hate. The third pile of stuff is what you're good at. What have you been doing for 5 years or 10 years, and you finally had some kind of insight that you wish someone had told you when you started? That's money. That's so powerful. That's the most important, powerful kind of story you can tell in a crazy format like this. And if you have none of these three things, then your job is a meta story. You need to do things outside of this format that will give you opportunities to tell stories about. And if you fail that, then you get a meta story about the story, how you tried to find a story to tell, but you failed. That's also a story. Now, when it comes to this format, people get freaked out, and I gotta tell my story up on stage. It's now this whole dynamic of public speaking. Well, you should know, there's lots of famous public speakers that were actually lousy speakers. People like Cicero, Moses, and this guy, Lincoln. They were probably actually not very pleasant to listen to. They had stutters, high-pitched voices, but what they said was interesting. They told stories that they refined, and they made really clear what their points were. So people paid more attention to the ideas and how it's actually said, which is true today. And in fact, the other thing to be worried about is the time limit. The Gettysburg Address is only about 2 minutes long to read. You could do 2 Gettysburg Addresses in one Ignite. So you have no worries about how long, I can't fit anything. Yes, you can fit it in. Now, the other fear people have has to do with the fact that the slides move on their own. There's this Grim Reaper looming overhead at every moment. It's going to come like a Terminator. It's going to knock me into the next thing. People are terrified about this. I happen to think it's kind of funny. I think it's kind of funny in the same way we worry about things that we can't control. You have 2 choices for things you can't control. You can be paranoid about them, deny them, or you can revel in them. And I think this is a perfect format. You guys know it's coming. It's part of the entertainment that we're all going to expect to have happen, and we can make a joyful experience come from it, right? You guys are going to support me if I screw up this slide, right? You guys are with me? Right. Thank you. All right. So Ignite audiences happen to be some of the best audiences to speak to because you guys are on my side. You might be drunk, and that may help a little bit. But you're on my side. You're going to back me if I make a mistake. So if you want to try out public speaking, you're going to get good, positive audiences in this environment. Now, the last thing, this is the more practical portion of my 5 minutes, how to use time. It's a philosophical question, but a practical question for these 5 minutes. You only have time to say 4 or 5 things. So you want to be really careful what they are. You can't fit that much more into 5 minutes. So think about that before you get started. The second thing is you're going to lose your first slide and your last slide due to applause, people throwing things at you, your introduction. You're going to blow those. You're going to practice and plan for having less time than even the 20 slides that you get. Now, the last thing is a little trick here. People get up here and they go into full speed mode. They're talking like auctioneers on crack and going really fast. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. So look in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. In a second, you will see a little mark appear, a little cigarette burn mark. I have now put the same image on 2 consecutive slides. This is legal. It is allowed. You can hack the format as much as you want. A slide is we don't use slides anymore. The whole notion of a slide is kind of ridiculous, so hack it to tell your story. The last thing, if you're working with 4 or 5 minutes of time, you can rehearse and practice 10 times in an hour. Now, I recommend you do it at least once before you make any slides at all, just so you can figure out what your points are and what you want to say. And then as you practice, build the material and backfill it in. So to sum up, all of you have a story to tell, and you're good at it. Second, don't worry about the Grim Reaper. You can hack around that. And third, practice is everything. And I hope to see you guys up here next time. Thank you.
Excuse me. All right, that's Scott talking about Ignite. So you heard a bit about the Ignite format in there, 20 slides and the auto advance. Maybe less important if you're doing that, not doing that format, but that was only a 5-minute presentation. And what I love about that one is that it kind of encapsulates what we saw in those other 2 videos, right? About the idea of practicing your story, refining it, focusing on what's important, and then incorporates what Nancy talked about the journey, maybe even making your story the meta story about a story. How you failed to tell a story or how you succeeded can also be interesting. That's it for my slides, my story. I want to hear you tell your story. I've been lucky enough to speak at local meetups and a couple conferences. And I'm more than happy to sit down with you and help you refine your pitch. If you're submitting to a conference or some kind of meetup, happy just to talk about an upcoming story that you might want to tell at work or with a friend. Happy to, share tips and tricks, things I've learned. I will share the slides and links to all this stuff in the Virtual Coffee Slack after the fact. You can find me at Virtual Andy in Slack or anywhere else, mostly on the internet. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Andy. I think this is really great. Everything that we do really is storytelling, right? Like even in interviews, we talk about that a lot. And I think, you know, learning how to capture that story and how to tell that story is so valuable in so many different things that we're doing in our lives. Are there any questions that people want to ask?
So we got one in the chat from Ryan. Ryan, you can unmute or I can just read it.
I'm in a wind tunnel, so go ahead and read it.
Cool. All right, so Ryan said, what were the most important aspects of what you covered in preparation for this brown bag? So as I mentioned, I gave this talk, I've given this talk a few times. So for this specific brown bag, I didn't have to do a ton of preparation because I already had the slide deck. I had links to all the videos set up. And I had given it 4 or 5 times. So I helped my past self, helped my future self out with this one. Goes to that idea of like refining your story. I tweaked a couple of the slides, even just a few minutes before doing this morning, and left myself some notes and reminders of things I wanted to talk about. So I think super important to kind of like go through your material, you know, the week of, a couple days before, whatever makes sense for you. But once you kind of get a story down and are able to tell it, you can reuse that over and over. You can iterate it as time goes on, much like code or a project that you might build. You know, having good tests will help your future self out. And like having your slides all polished and links and things will definitely help you out in the future. Hopefully that answers that, Ryan.
Yeah, I love that. Go ahead, Meg.
Hey, Andy. I was wondering, so you said you gave this talk before. I wanted to know how many times I kind of recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said you gave it, this is your second time giving it virtually. But like how many times did you give it virtually versus in person? And like what is the difference between like telling a story in person versus virtually? And also besides this time, obviously, which was like the most fun time you did it, like when the audience was really engaged? And
Yeah, super good question. Okay, so I'll talk about virtual versus in person from a limited perspective. I'll explain that in a second, and then I'll talk about the fun aspect of it. Yeah, super good question. Thanks. I have worked remote distributed before, but always in the pre-COVID times, we always had some in-person component to that. So I would usually see folks eventually. And so for me, you know, presenting in person, you have an opportunity to meet the audience before you talk. So that helps me calm nerves. That's a tip from Scott in his book, is like, if you're nervous, you've never met a bunch of these people before, just go say hi, right? Like, hey, I'm Andy, I'm the speaker later. How you doing, Meg? Nice to meet you. And then when I'm talking, I can look for you in the audience and I'll see a friendly face, right? And that can like calm you down. So remote, I don't really get that. Like Becca hopped on early and, you know, I slacked with her a little bit. So it's good to be like, okay, I know Becca's my friend here. I can be not nervous, and I know you all are extremely friendly. So that helps. But remote, that's obviously a lot different. So maybe ask a friend, you know, if you're going to present remotely, maybe ask a friend to show up and kind of be there to support you, to look for you on the screen. Remote, you don't get the feedback. So if I try and tell a joke, I have to know like no one's going to laugh. No one laughs at my jokes in person either. But you know, you won't hear the feedback from the audience. You also can't see if they're getting bored. You know, so you'll see the person in the back like tune out 5 minutes in. You think, all right, I got like provide more energy. And remote, that's really difficult. I am not like, I haven't done live streaming of my desktop, and I'm not a gamer, so I don't do that kind of thing either. Like So there's probably better tools for me to use if I was going to do more remote presentations to make transitions a little more seamless, to go right into videos. Maybe I would buy, pay for a YouTube subscription so there's no chance of ads. So kind of goes to that idea of like preparation. So I think if you're going to do remote, properly, I need to do better preparation. Those are some things I've learned from doing a couple remote. In terms of this one, I talked about that idea, like, short presentations with coworkers can be really powerful. At my previous place of employment, Cloudability, we would set aside time on Tuesdays for lunch for 2 5-minute talks. We called it 2 for Tuesday. And the idea was you could talk about anything you wanted, but whether it was like, somebody talked about, I think, brownies one time and how much they loved making brownies. We talked about lasers, we talked about math. It was just a way to just for us to hang out. It was in-person times, but just for a way to get us to know each other and share our story. And so I gave this talk as a prelude to that of like, please come tell your story at this 2 for Tuesdays thing. And so that was a lot of fun because it just fit right in with that idea of like, let's get everybody together to hang out. Yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Love that idea.
Just real quick, sorry. I totally understand your telling a joke and having it be crickets, because when I post things and I do that, I'm like, I'm just gonna assume you're all laughing your butts off on mute without the camera on.
Right.
But also, was there like a presentation that really stood out for you that had a time when you gave this presentation, or was that your 2 for Tuesdays? Is that the one that, okay.
Yeah, that was the most fun because that was kind of why this presentation came about. So just the idea of like, we had 20 people in the room and I really wanted to hear their stories at our little 2 for Tuesday events. And it was just a fun thing to talk about.
Really cool concept. Thanks, Andy. This was really great.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Brown. That's why I didn't have my camera on, but it was
no worries.
Kirk, I know you had your hand up. I don't know if you still have a question.
Sort of. I missed a little bit, so I'm not sure if it was answered already, but I noticed like during a lot of the video presentations, a lot of it seemed to talk about, like visual cues, that people respond to other people's visual cues. We respond to people's tone of voice and their gesticulations. And so I was wondering, in this time of virtual stuff, and I think Gant maybe talked about this a little bit too, it's much harder to see the person who is doing the presentation, or you only see this tiny piece of them. And I was wondering if you had any like techniques for, overcoming that, because like I know when I give a talk in person, like I'm just like constantly moving, which I think people find entertaining, at least funny to watch, and I don't have that anymore. So now they have to listen to what I actually say, and that's scary.
Yeah, totally. I don't have any good tips, honestly. I would probably look at some of the folks that are doing, live streaming really well, kind of how they maybe control their screen or mix in between their face or their camera versus what they're trying to show you on their screen. But I don't have much experience with that.
Yeah, I think that's such a challenge and definitely something that I'm trying to figure out, how to replicate. You can't exactly replicate the in-person experience online, but it is hard without that feedback to really like bring the energy and not be nervous. So if anybody has tips, I would love to hear them. Go ahead, Sahil. Just see Gant pop up.
Strobe lights look like that. That looks like a good idea. I like it.
Hi, yeah, thanks. It was really great. Thanks for the talk. My question, I've brought this up before, sort of pertains to the, we contain multitudes idea. One thing I personally struggle with is especially being online, is like knowing what and what not to share personally. And I guess my question is sort of, like I hear the term personal brand a lot, and I kind of recoil from that because for me it's like very all or nothing. Like either I sort of share everything, which scares me, or else I share nothing. And so to date, it's kind of been almost nothing. So I guess my question is sort of, how do you avoid like telling your story becoming that something that's like really packaged and kind of fake? And how do you think about being authentic with regard to storytelling it without it becoming like really contrived and fake and like presenting your life like a sort of movie? I don't know if there's a question in there somewhere. If
Yeah, and it's a deep one, right? We have a pretty fearless leader here, as Becca just mentioned. I mean, she's told an incredibly vulnerable story multiple times, right? Like you've given that talk many times.
Yeah, I cry every time too. So
Yeah. If I could answer that in a way that maybe would give you something concrete, I think Becca kind of nailed it. Like it's very personal in that it's really up to you with what you want to share. I mean, maybe you do want a polished brand of yourself because you're trying to focus on, I want to do DevRel for this very specific IoT sprinkler system, and like I know that the company that I want to work for is really kind of formal, and like so I'm going to put my brand out there as this kind of formal IoT expert. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's your story, it's your goal. In terms of like concrete steps, I think there's some good advice in what Nancy shared of the idea that the audience is the hero and the outcome is really important to think about. So what is it that you want to share? Like, what is the outcome you hope to get by sharing that? And I think that translates well to like your personal engagement. So if you're going to talk to a coworker about some kind of tough subject, right? There's kind of that crucial conversations idea, and there's tips to those kind of conversations. I think you can apply that to your storytelling. Like, I want to set this foundation. Here's the thing that's important to me. Hey, audience, here's what I want you to know about that. Because I want to then I want to further the thinking in public, or I want to get myself out there to put me in a position to get a job. So think through that outcome the whole way. Like I can tell the story about the time that I got a tick when I was a kid. Like, what does that do for you all? Like, it's, like, oh, great, Andy, you were playing in the woods. But maybe there's something I want to tell about that, how important it was for me to have a mom who, supported me or whatever that was. So to kind of like think through those steps of what you want to share and what you're hoping to get out that. And I think that will maybe give you some guidelines to, okay, maybe I don't feel comfortable sharing this part. And so I can leave that out because it's not really important to what I want to achieve. So when it comes to the story, it needs refinement. And I think there's a lot of powerful stuff in this idea of vulnerability and being vulnerable, but it doesn't mean you need to feel like uncomfortable in being, in that aspect, right? So think through the outcomes of what you want to achieve by sharing, and maybe that would give you some concrete steps going forward.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you. That's really great. Thanks so much.
I think always,
you're welcome.
Remembering that you are in control of telling your story too, right? Like, this is your space. You can tell it in your own way, in the way that makes you most comfortable. And also, like, through sharing your own story, you're inviting people to share with you. And so there's like this balance, exactly what they were talking about, this idea of you're the mentor, not the hero. And thinking about it in those terms, I think I don't know, at least for me, it makes it a little bit more accessible in terms of what vulnerability means. Go ahead, Meg.
I was just wanted to piggyback off of that excellent advice both you and Andy gave. I'm on my phone and can't enter stuff in the chat that well. For Sahil, when I've spoken about it a little bit in the group, and like I struggle with mental health issues, and when I decided to make this switch into the tech industry and become a programmer, I also made this conscious decision to use that that power I'll have as like a more privileged employee, like, because tech employees get a lot of special treatment because we're so valuable, to just talk about my own experiences in hopes to help other people be more comfortable talking about theirs. And Sahil, like, I totally understand how what you're saying is like, it seems like there's all or nothing. Like you polish your story and send it out in this like, and I think sometimes it seems like that because the ones you hear, people are so experienced with telling, whereas I'm in that stage where I'm very new at talking about it, even though it's been like a couple of years, but I'm still like, whenever I talk about it, it's different every time. And I think Andy spoke to that as well, about polishing it, and you make iterations. You could go and give a presentation about it, and that doesn't have to be the one you stick with for the rest of your life. You can change it as your life changes, and just for whatever situation you're in. So that's kind of my approach to it, especially with my situation. It's a ever-changing thing in my life. So whatever your personal story that you want to share, whether it's kind of static or dynamic, that doesn't mean your story has to stay that way.
Yeah, super good point. Thanks for sharing that, Meg. I like that somebody reminded me a year ago or two. There's a new kindergarten class every year. At least here in the US and Germany, right? We have kindergarten. Like there's a new set of kids coming up and learning every year. And you're gonna have to teach and share your story perhaps to a new group often. And that means there's always an audience that's at that stage of learning and potentially interested in what you have to share. And you don't have to focus on, oh, here's the polished story, here's the polished blog for like the pros. You can also share your story with the people that are coding for the very first time or learning about tech for the very first time. Because there's a new kindergarten class every year. There's a new set of learners all the time. And the way that you tell the story might really, and this, thanks for sharing that, Meg, might really relate with someone in that same situation. And that might be just the thing that they need to hear today to get them a little further and expand their thinking. And that's a super powerful thing. And we don't get that if it's always the same polished people giving the same presentation. We need the new ideas. We need the diverse perspectives. That's how communities learn and grow and share, and super exciting stuff to think about going forward.
Yeah, I love that. And we have some messages in the chat. Gant said, everyone can learn from everyone. It's so true. And I love what Kirk says, the imperfect version is what resonates with people. And I for sure feel that deeply in my soul. And Abby said, it's never too early to start. And it's not. And like, start with something that you're comfortable with, and with a community that you're comfortable with. All right, we have a couple more minutes, but I don't think that there are any more questions. Andy, do you have any last things you want to say?
You kind of hit on it in the intro, but that's a true story for me. So I worked in government contracting for a long time, and I gave a lot of boring presentations. Like, okay, here comes an audience, and here's like 10 slides with just a bunch of text on them. And I started going to conferences and meetups, and I went to, it was called No Fluff, Just Stuff. It was like a Java focused conference. And that's probably like 2007, 2008-ish. And I went to a talk, and the speaker, Scott Davis is his name. He like used a bunch of images in his slides, and I went, oh, that was so much better. Like, I really enjoyed that presentation. Usually I don't like these. And so, you know, find something that you like, find a style that you like, a personal brand that you like, and try it out and see what you think, and go, oh, okay, that feels okay. I'll keep going. Or, you know, stop and iterate, pivot, try something else. Just like different languages, different tech stacks, there's some that are going to resonate with you very well. And I think the same for telling your story, sharing information. Some formats are gonna mesh really well with your style, and others aren't. And it's okay to do the thing that works for you. And it's going to be, like we just said, everyone can learn from everyone. Super great point, Gant. So don't be afraid to share it. We got one last question, Ryan. I'll read it real quick. Well, thank you for one. As a speaker, you're really easy to listen to. You seem relaxed and natural. You don't ramble. I disagree with that. And even your cadence is perceived positively. Maybe. Thanks again for saying that. Those are kind words. Has that always been true, or did you work on improving that stuff consciously or deliberately? It is definitely a conscious and deliberate effort. So as I mentioned, I've had my poor wife come sit and listen to me talk and like stop halfway through. Nope, pause. I screwed up, and start over. And she's not in tech, so she's like, what are you rambling about, you silly fool? But she gives me great advice, is super supportive. She's attended some of my talks in person, traveled with me to conferences. So that's really helped. But, you know, being able to just practice, go over and over and over, try to remove the ums and the ahs and the likes and the wells and the weird pauses. But you can only do that through practice, just like playing an instrument, spending time writing code. It's going to take time and effort. So it's helped that I've had positions where I've given a bunch of presentations, and especially I had to give impromptu presentations a lot. Like, I'd get a call in the morning, hey, we're gonna have someone come by in 2 hours. Is that cool? It's like, oh, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And then that went from like, okay, no, yep, I have 3 slide decks, depending on who it is. When they call and say, we're gonna come by, I can give them one of those 3. And I had practice. And then after, you know, a year or 2 of that, people would call and they go, hey, Andy, can we have this group come by and talk to you? I said, yep, no problem. Because I had practiced, and now I had the resources I needed. So practice can definitely help. And it doesn't take long. As the one speaker said, if for a 5-minute talk, you could practice that 10 times in an hour. So I will now stop rambling, as I want to do.
You're not rambling. That was really great advice. Thank you so much. So thanks again to Andy for being here and giving us this presentation and answering all of our questions. It was very, very wonderful, but definitely feel free to keep this conversation up in our Slack. I know that lots of people are interested in this topic and maybe couldn't make it or would benefit from hearing more. I really would like to borrow that 2 for Tuesdays idea. So somebody make sure that I do that. Let's see, we will be posting this online sometime eventually, but Andy's also going to drop the slides and stuff, I think, in the Brown Bag channel. Next week, we've got another Brown Bag coming up with chess and usability with Jesse, and that looks really interesting. We have lots of interesting Brown Bags coming up. So fun fact, we've had a Brown Bag every week or scheduled every single week since at least January, and some two Brown Bags in a week. So we've got fun ones coming up. We also have a newsletter dropping at the beginning of next week, a new monthly challenge coming your way that I think will pair nicely with this talk. And also, I can't remember what my and also is. So We are pretty much at time. Thank you so much again, Andy, for being here with us, and we'll see y'all soon.
Bye.
Thank you, Andy.